Chuck and Cheryl met through a mutual friend and just hit it off right away.
I think it's the first time she fell in love. I mean, she had other boyfriends, but she knew Chuck was the one. All she wanted to do was get married and start a family.
October 6, 1979, Chuck and Cheryl were married. I was the flower girl. I got to wear the pretty dress. My brother, I had never seen him happier.
The couple moves into a townhome in a quiet Aurora neighborhood. They have family nearby and a close network of friends.
Their condo was super, super nice. They would have friends over a lot.
Every Wednesday was her house cleaning day, laundry day. Everybody knew the fact that she was home all day on Wednesdays.
Chuck went to work, went home for his lunch so he could have lunch with Sherry. Was there for a while, and then he left and went back to work. There was something laying by the front door, was out of place. There was also some laundry that was kind of knocked over. He called out to her. He walked up the steps is when he found her.
As he got to the top of the stairs, he saw her hanging from the doorknob with an iron cord around her neck. He attempted to do CPR on her, and then he ran downstairs and he ran to the neighbor's house. The neighbor was a nurse, and they called an ambulance or the police. He continued to do CPR on her until the paramedics arrived.
Cheryl was my daughter, my firstborn. I called her Sherry from the time she was born. She was always a mama's girl.
We were about 4 years apart. We always got along, even though there was a big age gap. She would play Barbies with me. We were really close.
You have to look at the husband first because he's the closest one, and that's tough because they're grieving at the loss of a loved one.
Not only was Chuck his spouse, he was also the last person to see her alive, and he was the one who found her body. So he fit all three criteria of what would make the number one suspect.
Chuck went through many, many hours of questioning. They would go over his story again and again and again, and it took a toll on him.
Chuck was very angry with the police department because in his mind, he loved this woman so much, how could you ever consider me as a suspect?
It never crossed my mind that Chuck ever hurt her. Never crossed my mind.
We spoke with Chuck, who obviously said that he was working that day. We checked into his whereabouts between 2:30 and 6 p.m. and confirmed that he was seen on job sites.
Investigators rule Chuck out and scour the crime scene for clues.
They looked for evidence of latent prints on door handles, on her purse, on some of the items that were collected. A lot of the prints were smeared, smudged, and they had overlays, so they didn't identify a suspect. During her autopsy, her fingernails were clipped, and there was an apparent blood stain under one of the fingernails. The one thing we know is that the murder weapon was something that was close by. Her sister said that she last spoke with Cheryl at 3 p.m. that day on the phone, and then at 3:30, neighbors of the adjacent apartment heard a door slam, and then they heard several loud thuds, and then at 6 p.m. is when Chuck gets home and finds her. So the timeline was basically 3 p.m. to 6 that we were looking at.
Detectives look for a connection between Cheryl's murder and a string of burglaries in her neighborhood.
Part of their initial investigation was to determine whether somebody had encountered Cheryl Lynn at home when they were attempting to burglarize her home.
The Halls recently had a deadbolt installed on their door. That deadbolt was intact.
There did not seem to be anything disturbed within Cheryl Lynn's apartment, and there really wasn't items of value that were missing.
Larry Galloway worked at the same cable company as Chuck. Larry and my sister went to high school together. Him and his wife would socialize with Sherry and Chuck.
They kind of became casual friends. I think she always thought of him as a little bit odd.
He showed up there about 2 weeks before her murder while Chuck was at work. And he stayed for approximately 20 minutes. He made her feel uncomfortable, so much so that she told a friend about his unexpected visit.
Mr. Galloway answered questions about his whereabouts, his relationship with Cheryl Lynn Hall and her husband.
Between the hours of the murder, he was at his parents' home mowing the grass.
He also tells police why he visited Cheryl's home before the murder.
He was there to talk about some union business. Chuck was a union steward.
Larry Galloway had been fired from his position at the cable company, and my brother was able to save his job through the union. There was another time that my brother was unable to save Larry's job.
They weren't able to get any more information from Galloway, and there were no other leads for them to follow. The cops really had no choice but to move on.
Initially, the investigator spoke with Larry Galloway, and he gave his alibi and said he had no knowledge of the murder. Again, his name kept coming up as someone that could have possibly been involved. There were several people that were asked to take polygraph tests.
Mr. Galloway declined and ceased any cooperation with the investigation moving forward.
Once Larry Galloway refused to cooperate, once Chuck had been ruled out as a suspect, then that's where I think they hit that wall.
It was eating at me every day that went by. So I called Larry and I said to him, Larry, you're going to get what's coming to you one day. And he said, bring it on. And hung up. It was like an explosion inside of me. He just didn't seem to care what happened to her.
We felt like we were kind of backed into a corner.
In 1997, advancements in technology and DNA had started to evolve.
Larry Galloway refuses to give police a DNA sample. Prosecutors take the case to a grand jury, which issues a subpoena ordering Galloway to provide a DNA sample. His lawyers appeal the order to a judge.
The judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence to force Mr. Galloway to provide a DNA sample.
He got away with not giving his DNA. I was thinking, if I could just get my hands on you.
Our hopes were once again just absolutely shattered. Chuck, I believe, wholeheartedly suffered from PTSD. He would just start crying for no reason. He had 2 boys, and he loved them with all of his heart. But there was still in the back of his mind this terrible thing that had happened to him.
I had 10 years of law enforcement experience when I began looking into Cheryl Hall's murder case. In my mind, there's only one person that knows what happened, and that person is Larry. We set up surveillance on Larry Galloway's residence and sat there for about 2.5 hours until he left the residence with another gentleman. He drove to the Chili's restaurant. We maintained a visual on him while he was eating his meal. After he left the restaurant, that's when we went up to the table to collect his straw and utensils and napkin. The swabbing from the straw matched the bloodstain under her fingernails. This was the break that the case needed. This was what the family had been waiting for. We walked up to Larry Galloway and advised him that he was under arrest. Larry had no emotional reaction, didn't ask any questions. I told him the warrant was for murder, and he put his hands behind his back and was very compliant.
Just hours after the arrest, detectives question Larry Galloway.
There is absolutely no doubt that you were there when this occurred. No doubt. We just want to know. We just want to know why. Okay, that's all we want to know, is why this happened.
I can't answer you.
Why can't you answer me on that?
Because I didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything?
Done a lot of stuff, but nothing like that.
When you say nothing like that, and you've done a lot of stuff, what are you talking about?
Oh, you know.
He showed no remorse. We both knew without a doubt that we had the right guy.
Prosecutors prepare for trial and quickly realize their case is far from airtight.
There were a number of obstacles in this case. One of the challenges was the volume of DNA that was recovered from the crime scene. This was a case that was built on DNA, so any inconsistency was a significant concern. We made a decision to resolve the case by way of a plea agreement to hold him as accountable as I believe that we could based on the evidence.
We took the plea deal because we're not gamblers. Justice for Sherry was definitely not worth gambling.
As part of his plea agreement, Galloway must admit that he murdered Cheryl Hall. But he doesn't have to say why he killed the young woman.
Why would you do that to her? Why would you harm her? If I could just know why, then I think maybe I could live with it a little better. We got a call saying that Larry Galloway was out of jail. And I'm thinking, how could he be out of jail? He hasn't even served his 5 years.
Just a few months later, the family faces another heartbreak. Cheryl's widower, Chuck Hall, succumbs to the cancer he'd been fighting for several years.
My brother got to die knowing that the world knew that he was not a murderer. And that brought peace to him and to me. And losing my brother was very hard, but I knew he was going to be with his wife, with the love of his life.